Grace Point, we're here. We're glad you're here. I think we've got some stragglers on the patio. We should have done this outside. It's beautiful, right? Y'all want to stand with us? We're going to sing a song near and dear to our hearts. We believe it. God is with us. God is for us, all of us, because we're human, because we can breathe. Our heart is beating. God is on our side. So let's sing it all together. Maker of eternity, right here and now. Creator of all that we see, with us somehow. I cannot explain such mysteries. Who could ever know what this all means? The God of the universe, all around. Here we go. God is with us, God is for us, God is on our side. Let all who will hear join the chorus. God is on our side. Everything's gonna be alright. God is on our side. Breathing in us, the heartbeat of life itself, waking us up. And I cannot explain such mysteries. Who could ever know what this all means? The visible image of God is our love. That's right. Come on, sing it. God is with us. God is for us. God is on our side. They're coming in now, y'all. Yeah. Let all who will hear join the chorus. God is on our side. Everything is gonna be alright. God is on our side. God is with me, yes. God is on our side. Come on, let's sing that together. God is with you. God is with me. God is on our side. Make eye contact with somebody. Tell them, God is with you. God is with me. God is on. God is on our side. Maybe somebody else. God is with you. God is with me. God is on our side. God is with us. God is for us. God is on our side. Let all who will hear join the chorus. God is on our side. Everything's gonna be alright. God is on our side. Oh, God is on our side. That's good. Look at all of you. Yeah, they were just on the patio. We're so glad that you are with us today here at Grace Point. every single week we want to make sure, if you're new, if you've been here a while, we want to make sure that every single person knows that you are loved and celebrated just as you are. You belong here. This is your community. Exist how you exist. Love who you love. And we welcome and celebrate that. So we love that you're here. And we'd love for you to, maybe somebody beside you you've never had a conversation with, somebody across the room, hug a neck. I'm going to come out there. I see some people I want to speak to. So let's have a conversation and we'll be back. The meet and greet section, if you will.
Good morning, good morning, good morning, good morning. If you're an extrovert, you can go ahead and sit down if you want to. Good morning. My name is Tiffany. My pronouns are she, they. I am our director of our kids and our students and our college and some other stuff. And I'm so excited that you're here. And so for our online community, can we just say hi again if you haven't already? Yeah. Thanks for joining us. So I have a really special announcement that I am so excited to make. And if you know me, like, for me to be super excited about it is a big deal. This is my kids pastor and youth pastor coming out, and I don't know what this stance is, but this is what I have right now. So at the end of the month, okay, because it's October today, it's a new month. Yeah, I know. At the end of the month, we are going to host our own fall festival / trick or treat. Woo! Trunk or treat. My bad, I messed that up. Trunk or treat. Now, if you do not know what a trunk or treat is and you're very confused, it's very simple. You register, you park your car, literally you open the trunk, decorate it, be festive, whatever theme you want, go all out. There will be a prize for the best trunk. And then our kids come around and you hand them candy. And it's awesome. So it's a safe way for us to do trick-or-treating in our own community. If you're a person that lives in an apartment and you're like, I don't have kids, but I want to participate, literally someone in the first service shared that's why they want to be a part of it. So this is a really, really, really easy way to be engaged in the community and meet other people. Also, that's not the only thing we're doing. We will be doing bingo with lots of prizes. So if you want to donate prizes, there's ways you can do that. If you own a business or something like that, or have a connection, it's a really easy way to get involved and give back. We will have a chili cook-off. So if you're like our staff got very excited, bragging that they have the best chili. We will be able to tell because it is a competition, okay? So bring your chili, get excited to vote on what is the best. There will be other food. There will be pumpkin decoration. It will be all the things that are Fall Festival. But the biggest thing is that this is a time for you to get to know other people, to connect. If you're brand new or trying to get involved at Grace Point, this is a really easy entry because you don't have to talk to everyone. You don't have to do anything. Just show up and take some candy. Not from kids though. Wait until the end and we'll give you all the leftover candy. But if you're interested in being involved, you do not have to pre-register to participate, but we are asking people to volunteer, and that will be a link in our newsletter. And if you do not have our newsletter and don't get that, the QR code on the seat will help you get connected to that. That thing will help you get connected. So if you have questions, ask me, and if you just want to hang out, also just talk to me. I'm going to go with kids now. Goodbye. Oh, actually, there is no kids moment. If you are a kid volunteer, will you go to the door? And if you are a kid, 5th grade or under, I know it's weird. They're very confused. Will you go to the door with them? I know you're all sad for the lack of kid moment today.
Goodbye, kids. Have fun. You guys have fun. Sweet. Good morning, Grace Point. Welcome. So good to see you here today. It's very exciting to be in this space once again with you. My name is Murphy. My pronouns are he, him. And I want to first acknowledge the online community and say, hey, we're excited that you're here. Everybody wave at the online community. That's weak. That's really, do it like you really mean it. It's a wave at the online community. There you go. All right, we love you, online community. So glad that you're here. Uh-oh, my phone just started typing something. Okay, isn't that weird when that starts to happen? So, as she said, the QR code will get you everything I'm about to say, so you can tune out if you need to, although I have a change in here, and so you might want to listen up, especially if you're in common ground. So anyway, so the QR code will get you to the place where you can find all of this stuff on our website. If you're new here, connection card is used to sign up for the newsletter and get plugged in, all kinds of things. Everything's at the QR code link. So Common Ground was scheduled for today at Lipstick Lounge. I was just informed that it has been canceled for today. much sadness. I don't know why. They didn't tell me that part, but much sadness to let you know that the Common Ground, which is our social group for 30s and 40-something-ish folks, they were going to meet today, probably because getting to East Nashville with the Titans game, getting out at the same time was going to be a real difficult thing to do. So that probably has something to do with it. However, YAM, which is our younger folks with 20s to 30s, they are meeting this Thursday right here at the Wedge, the pizza place that's right next door. So this week, Thursday at the Wedge. You can find out all the information you need in the newsletter or online. So Launchpad, familiar with Launchpad? It's an incredible organization here in town that its primary focus is to be there and help with homeless youth, particularly homeless LGBTQ plus youth, which is an incredibly important thing. So I want to encourage you to anytime you get an opportunity to be helpful for Launchpad. But right now they are looking for about 40 folks to help them finish up construction of their new mobile housing navigation center. And they're going to do this on, check your calendars, Monday, October 9th from 8 a.m. to 12:30. So if you can possibly be there to assist with that on that Monday the 9th, that would be like a week from Monday. So there's a sign-up sheet back on the table back there in the corner or at the bottom of the stairs. You give your name, email, and your number, and FaithMote will connect with you and get you all the information on that. And as Tiffany mentioned, our next community social activity is Sunday the 29th of October. We'll have our normal 9 a.m. gathering. Then from 11 to 1, we'll have the Fall Festival and the Trunk or Treat. Don't forget to fill out the sign out that's also back there as well, since there are, as this says, lots of moving parts in that. Now, speaking of that same day, we're also going to be having a blood drive. So I know that's terrifying for some of you. However, I will tell you, I've not been the recipient of that, but I will say it's probably one of the most important gifts that you can give is to give blood. And they need it all the time, desperately, especially if you're an O, if your blood type is O anything, they could use that. So I want to encourage you, that same day, the 29th, we'll be having a blood drive here. And they will be here from 8 a.m. to 1 p.m., so you can connect with all of that. Last thing is financial support. We are so grateful for anything that you do to assist Grace Point in the mission that we have to be helpful to the LGBT community in the progressive Christian space. So it's really important, but we want to say thank you to those of you who already give and to those who might consider being a part of that. So there are 4 different ways that I have here that you can participate in that. We don't send around buckets or anything like that, although we're not opposed to it, I suppose. But we don't do that right now. So you can text any dollar amount to 84321. You can go to GracePoint with an E, gracepoint.net/give. You can scan the QR code on the screen and make that happen, or our Venmo is at GracePointTN. I think that's all the announcements that I have, so thank you very much.
Thanks, Murph. Yeah. Let's hear it from Murphy Gill. We are going to celebrate communion this morning. Today is a day known as World Communion Sunday. Happens every first Sunday of, I almost said August, but that's not what month it is, October. So if you haven't done anything difficult today, you're about to be handed a tray full of grape juice. And you're going to pass it, and that will be the difficult thing you get to do. You all can go right ahead and start passing it out. If you would like a gluten-free option, we have some on the back table. If you just throw your hand up, we can get you. We need one gluten-free over here. Where did Murphy go? Murphy, would you mind to grab a gluten-free from here? You get a couple. I think we need a couple. Look how this is a well-oiled machine. Look at what we're doing here. So if this is your first time participating in communion with us at Grace Point, a couple things. One, I'm distracted. I'm just going to watch it all happen. So, what was I saying? Oh, at Grace Point. When we celebrate communion here, it means a couple things to us. One, on a day like today, World Communion Sunday, where Christians all over the world are celebrating communion, for us it's a little bit of an act of resistance and reclamation. Anybody in here ever been told you're not a Christian before by somebody because yeah, some of us. Sometimes people say we're not a real Christian church, but here we are, a real Christian church with some real Christians in it. And so today we celebrate communion as a way of saying nobody gets to define who we are or how we are, how we believe. That's something we get to choose. And so that's part of it. Another part of it is a celebration of belonging, that we are here today and that everybody belongs. Nobody gets excluded. If you want to participate, you are welcome and included, because this is how the table's supposed to work. And so today we gather and celebrate the fact that whoever you are, wherever you're from, whatever you did in traffic on the way here today, notwithstanding, you belong. And we invite each other to the table with this liturgy, this reading together. So would you join me in reading this as we celebrate today? Come to this table, you who have much faith and you who struggle with believing, you who have been here often and you who have come for the first time, you who are at peace and you who feel despair. We are all part of the human family, and there is a place for us here. Christ invites everyone to the table. May this bread and wine unite us all. Amen.
As you feel free to participate and celebrate in that, when you're able, if you can, stand with us again. We want to sing this song together. It sounds like a hymn. It's not. It's an original Grace Point hymn, I guess we can call it. But we'd love to hear y'all sing this with us. In love alone, the world was made, dust and divinity dispersed, the fingerprints of God displayed, touching the farthest universe. What eyes could see, what hands could hold, such mystery, such truth untold, no mind could learn, and still we know this is the wonder of God's love. In love alone, we take our breath, drawn from the very source of life, Spirit of God, in bone and flesh, filling our bodies, hearts, and minds. We're not afraid to trust ourselves. There is no shame, no threat of hell. Our souls find rest, for all is well. This is the glory of God's love. In love alone, we will abound. Justice and mercy is our work. Hands in This is the goodness of God's love. We will not place our faith in crowns. We humbly lay our weapons down, for this is where our strength is found. This is the power of God's love. This is the power of God's love. So beautiful. Thank you so much. You can be seated.
Thank you so much. Just tell y'all to prepare yourselves, because the song that they're going to do next, when I get done, is just, you're going to be torn between sitting in hushed awe and hanging from the roof. Like, you're not going to know what to do. You may do both. I don't know. We'll see what happens. There was a point at the end of 9 o'clock where I was like, why is nobody like just literally climbing the walls right now? This is so good. Then I was like, oh, everybody's just so like blown away. So happy October. And also with you. It's one of my favorite months for lots of reasons. The temperature is going to get cooler. Anybody excited about that? Playoff baseball, so exciting. Spooky season is upon us. Any spooky season people in here this morning? Yes, great. Also, we are starting a new series, and this series is a crash course in progressive Christianity. And the reason we're doing this series, and I want to be really clear, this is not how every progressive Christian would talk about things. I'm going to share from my lens and my perspective what progressive Christianity means. This is also not going to be an exhaustive series. I'm not going to say everything I think. We don't have time. Advent is coming. We're going to start celebrating Christmas. I have to cut this off at some point. So we're going to just explore what I think right now are some of the most central, important things to talk about. And the way these sermons are going to function in this series, it's going to be a little bit different. So I'm going to try to talk less, say less, like maybe keep it to 25 minutes or so. So if you see me going over, you can go Baptist on me and start tapping your watch. And then I want to open it up for conversation, because I'm going to introduce some things that may be brand new ideas for some of you. At 9 o'clock, we had a great conversation at the end of the teaching, and so we'll do that each week during this series, where I'll just sort of say, here's what I've got, what do y'all think? And then you can share, you can ask questions, you can give constructive compliments, like whatever you want to do. That's what we'll do. So another why for this series is, I think many of us now know what we no longer believe. Right? We know that some of the stuff we were handed doesn't work for us. We know maybe the inerrancy and infallibility of the Bible are no longer things we hold on to. We maybe know that penal substitutionary atonement, how many of you know what that means? How many of you don't know what that means? Look around. These are the hands of people who are blessed and highly favored, because they don't know what penal substitution. Essentially, penal substitutionary atonement, we'll talk about a little bit next week, I guess. It has to do with the death of Jesus and how the death of Jesus functions, and I don't want to bore you with that. I'll bore you with that next week. We also know that we don't believe in the rapture, which was apparently supposed to happen a couple weeks ago, and didn't, shockingly. And then we don't believe in hell, right? Like we know there's things we no longer hold on to. But then what do we have left? And is it possible to have some sort of meaningful faith? Like when you reject all this stuff, like what do you actually embrace? And that's what I want to offer in this series, that there are some things we can embrace. And I want to begin today with what I think is the central difference between progressive Christianity and conservative Christianity. I would say between toxic and non-toxic Christianity. There are some big differences, but this is the central difference. And the central difference between progressive and conservative Christians is not that progressive Christians are affirming, although we are. It's not that we don't believe in hell, that we don't. That's not the big deal. The biggest difference is the starting point. And for progressive Christians, we begin with our faith from a different starting point than conservative Christianity does. Conservative Christianity, we're going to talk about this today, begins with the idea that you and I are born separated from God. That we enter this world because of original sin. We are sinners, and because we are sinners, God can't be around us, and so we are born separated from God, and the entire point of Christian faith is to be reconnected with God, right? We were born disconnected, and now we're going to be connected with God. Progressive Christianity does not begin there. Progressive Christianity begins with the idea that every single human being is born inherently united with God, which is a way of saying we enter this world in union and connection to God, and nothing can separate us from the love of God. That's where we begin. It is a major difference. And I want to explore a little bit about why. Because from the perspective of original sin, of traditional Christianity, we enter this world, and we, through no fault of our own, really, because when you're born, what have you done wrong, right? You didn't ask to be born. You just enter the world. You screaming your head off, and people are waiting on you hand and foot. And oh, by the way, you're a sinner. Why is that the case? Well, in this lens, it's because the first human beings, Adam and Eve, were hanging out naked in a garden. And one day they ate some fruit they shouldn't have eaten. And because they did that, this thing called sin entered the world. And through Adam and Eve, that sin, almost like it's part of our genetic makeup, our DNA code, that sin gets passed on to every single human being who would ever live. And because of that, because we are born with that issue, with that sin issue, then we need somehow to be saved, reconciled. Something has to happen to put us on right terms with God. Adam and Eve were the first domino, and then all the other dominoes went with them. Right, that's sort of the standard interpretation. And so if we were to give it sort of some language, we would say that for many Christians, if not most in the world, their primary understanding of the meaning of Christianity is that it is about overcoming sin and separation from God. Does that sound familiar? That's sort of how we were taught it. I don't see it that way anymore. And partly that's the case because almost 14 years ago, I became a parent. And what has been the case for me my entire life, I think, is that my head has been playing catch up with my heart. Because my heart went places that my head wasn't allowed to go. Does that make sense? So when people ask, when did your faith shift and all that, for me it wasn't just, it was partly engaged around reading the Bible, but that was trying to help my head catch up to my heart. My heart knew intuitively that some of the stuff I'd been preaching and teaching just wasn't very good. And I wanted to go, and I wanted to find something better, and it's scary. But then for me, this was a heart issue. Leaving original sin behind, leaving this idea of separation from God started in my heart. And it started, I was already making a journey toward progressive Christianity when our oldest was born. But something about holding, and he was 6 pounds, and he couldn't talk back yet. I was scared to death I was going to break him. And I remember looking at him and thinking, I'm supposed to believe that he's separated from God. I'm supposed to believe that he is somehow born a sinner. And that just didn't compute for me. I'm looking down in this little face who has just begun drawing breath and thinking, I don't think there's anything wrong with him. I don't think he needs to be fixed. I don't think God needs to kill something or to cover him in blood to love him and make him okay. I think he's okay. And for me, that began that unraveling of, well, he's my kid, so of course he's okay, but what about everybody else's kids? Are they okay? And what about every other human being? Are we really born separated from God? Are we really born disconnected? And so after that moment of becoming a parent, my head was playing catch up with my heart. And what I discovered is for lots and lots of people, being able to talk about something through the lens of the Bible is really important. One of the questions we had at 9 o'clock was, how do I begin to talk about this with people who disagree with me? And I encouraged this person, one, to buy catcher's gear for baseball because it's safer that way. And then number two, it can really be helpful for people who are still within a more conservative Christianity. It can be really helpful to ground it in an interpretation of the Bible. I'll just be honest with you. I don't need the Bible to tell me that something is good for it to be good. Right? I don't need the Bible to tell me it's okay to be affirming. I'm affirming. I don't need the Bible to tell me that people aren't born broken and sinful. I just intuitively know that. But for some people, and there was a point for me where having it wrapped in the body. It's sort of like taking medicine, for a kid, like you put it in mashed potatoes and then they eat it. Like it's helpful that way. And Scripture does matter and it's significant. And so I needed this explained to me in this way. And so I'm going to walk through some Scripture today to try to make this make sense. But I think the really important thing to note is original sin. Do you know when the doctrine of original sin came into existence? You would think it would be like Noah on the boat, right? No, Carol, you're exactly right. It was through a guy named Augustine, St. Augustine. Some people call him Augustine. You have to put the Eastern Kentucky on it when you say it. Like Augustine. Augustine, he lived from 354 to 430. So you're talking 400 years after the beginning of the Jesus movement is the first time somebody said, I think there's this thing called original sin. And when you read Augustine's story, what you begin to realize is in his days before he converted to Christianity, after his conversion, he had a lot of shame over some stuff he had done before he became Christian. And what he did is he creates a doctrine to try to make sense of it and then passes that shame that he experienced down onto all the rest of us. Aren't we so grateful for Augustine and his contribution to Christian history? And he actually ended up teaching that the way original sin gets passed is through sexual intercourse. And so you can also see how purity culture began in the 400s. Because not only does he say every human is broken and busted and needs saving, but also that the act of sex is dirty and unclean and it's a problem, right? So Augustine could have benefited from some therapy and less theologizing on these important issues. But this is what we have. And so, by the way, I was Googling around just the internet is fun sometimes. And I was like, original sin, what are people saying? And I found this link to this article, and I did not read the article, and you'll know why from the title. But here was the thing. Adam and Eve committed at least 24 sins in Genesis 3. 24? I mean, you think if they're going to do it for the first time, they should go for broke and like do 50 or something, but it's 24. So I want to explore that story because that story is the story that essentially is where we get this doctrine, right? An interpretation of Genesis 3. And so let's just talk about it. The Bible begins in Genesis chapter 1, not chapter 3, chapter 1. And in chapter 1, it's sort of the closest thing you get to a poem. And it's a poem of creation where the earth is created in 6 days. And people have argued and fought about how literal that poem is. Not going to do that right now. But the reality is it's one creation story. In this creation story, God creates by speaking. Let there be light, and there was light. Let there be an expanse, called it sky. And at the end of every day, God announces, it's good, it's good, it's good, until God creates people, and it's very good. And it seems like God just creates people. Like God's like, let's create some people, and boom, there are people. Genesis 2 is really different. It's a different source. It's from a different author. And this tells a much more intimate story. God is also anthropomorphized in the story, which means God is given a lot of human characteristics, which we'll see in the story. In sort of chapter 1, God is just sort of this being that can say stuff and it happens. In Genesis 3, God is really different. Genesis 3 is actually an older story. What we see in Genesis 1 shows evolution and how the Israelites understood God. Because God isn't anthropomorphized in that story. Anyway, that's bonus content. So in this story, God creates a garden called Eden, and God forms from the dirt the first human. And God sculpts the human out of dirt and then breathes into this human being the breath of life. It's the first act of CPR in human history. God breathes into this being, and the being becomes alive. Eventually, there's another being, Adam and Eve. They're these two people, and their job is to join God in caring for all creation. And God tells them, in this garden, there are all kinds of trees. You can eat from any of them. There's the tree of life. There's, fig tree, like whatever. You can have all this. There's just this one tree. It's the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Don't eat from this tree. If you eat from this tree, bad news, you're going to die. So, naturally, by the way, can we just talk about God's parenting style? It would be like me going into our living room with a pair of scissors and laying it on the coffee table and saying, kids, I want to draw your attention to the scissors. Don't touch the scissors. Do not pick up the scissors and run. And do not chase your brother with the scissors you're running around the room with, right? You don't draw that kind of attention because the moment you say don't do that, it's like when I set a drink down on the table. Kids, I have a drink on the table. They were nowhere near, but you know where they're all at? They're all right here. It's like this thing in kids, like, I can't do that. I want to get as close to doing it as possible. And so God does this, right? Like there are these trees, you can eat of all these, you can't eat of this one. And then If you've never heard this story before, you're going to think this is wild. Then a talking snake enters the story. Yes, talking snake enters the story. Apparently the snake is not crawling, because that happens at the end of the story. And so like the snake just with legs just walks in and is like, hey, how are you? Totally normal. I'm a talking snake. That's what happens. The snake says to this first humans, like, look, I think God's afraid that if you eat this, you're actually going to become like God, and then God is not going to have the monopoly. So, try it out. And they eat the fruit, and something happens. At the end of Genesis 2, we are told these first humans were naked and unashamed. Now, I think this idea of being naked and unashamed is deeper than just not wearing clothes, right? I think it's something more significant. It's a vulnerability. It's a walking into a space and not feeling like you don't belong there. It's not feeling like you have to hide anything. It's not wearing a facade. It's not putting on a mask. It's not pretending. There's a vulnerability between these two people, and they don't even recognize it. It's the most natural thing in the world for them, a vulnerability, a trust. And then they eat this fruit, knowledge of good and evil. Then the eyes of both were open, Genesis 3:7. And they knew that they were naked. And they sewed fig leaves together and made loincloths for themselves. Then they heard the sound of the Lord God walking in the garden at the time of the evening breeze. And the man and his wife hid themselves from the presence of the Lord God among the trees of the garden. But the Lord God called to the man and said, where are you? A couple things. God shows up for a walk, like you do when you're God. Right? See, God is more like God has human quality. Like the idea that God could walk is a human quality. Then God shows up in the garden, starts looking around, and God's like, I thought I made people. Where are the people? And God says, where are you? It's like God is really bad at hide and seek. Like can't find, or maybe God's playing a game with them, like when my kids, they're small and they play hide and seek and you can see their feet sticking out, or they just put like a bag on their head or something, and you're like, I can see the rest of you. Maybe that's what we're supposed to think, but either way, God starts looking for them and says, where are you? And the man says, I heard the sound of you in the garden and I was afraid because I was naked and I hid myself. And God said, who told you that you were naked? And did you by chance eat from that tree that I told you not to eat from? Now, this idea of the knowledge of good and evil, think about it like this. When you think you possess the knowledge of good and evil, then you get to decide who is good and who is bad. And eventually, you get to decide what happens to the good people and the bad people. The good people get rewards, the bad people get punished, right? That's the knowledge of good and evil. It's deciding who's right, who's wrong, who lives, who dies. That's the knowledge of good and evil. And these first humans take the fruit, they eat it, their eyes are opened, and suddenly the vulnerability that they were able to exist with, the trust, the lack of self-consciousness. Because hasn't everybody had that dream where you show up to school naked? And it's not a good dream. But for Adam and Eve in the beginning, that was life. And they were totally unashamed. And then suddenly, that vulnerability drops away. Why? Because they're afraid of being judged by the other. Why is it that sometimes when we walk into a space and we don't know anybody, and for extroverts, you're not going to know what this is. I waffle between extrovert and introvert. You ever walk into a room and just think, they're going to think I'm the dumbest person they've ever met? Anybody else ever do that? Like you're totally nervous to walk in. Yes, do that all the time. There's none of that before. And now there's this fear of, are they going to like me? Are they going to judge me? Are they going to think I'm bad? And then right after this, they fess up, we ate from the tree, and then all of a sudden the blame game starts. And Adam blames Eve, and Eve blames the talking snake, and the snake is just left holding the bag. Right? The snake loses his legs and the ability to talk, apparently, thankfully. Could you imagine if like snakes could talk to you today? It would just be the weirdest thing. And so there's this sort of unraveling that begins to happen. Now, a few observations. Number one, are these people separated from God because of what happens in the garden? No, eventually they're expelled from the garden so they don't eat the tree of life and get stuck in their shame. But is that what happens? No, God doesn't shy away from them. God shows up. God walks with them. God stitches them some clothes. God takes care of them. They have shame, and God helps them process their shame. They're not separated from God, but they are hiding, which means they have a sense of shame and estrangement. They sense something is off about their relationship with God. I would argue that it's a one-sided deal. There's not something off between God and them. There's something off between them and God on their. They feel like something is off. You ever had that happen in a relationship where you're still connected, but something is, to use a technical term, wonky between you? Like maybe you're right next to each other, but you feel miles apart internally. Like that sort of vibe. Second, the word sin never shows up in Genesis chapter 3, ever. God doesn't show up in the garden and go, y'all sinned. Why'd you sin? Why did you sin 24 times? Like, why? That's not at all within the story. The first mention of sin in the Bible comes in Genesis 4, and it's in the context of Cain being so angry and jealous of his brother that he wants to kill his brother, and God says to Cain, he uses the image of sin being like an animal ready to pounce. Sin is crouched, ready to pounce on you, but you must master it. You must resist it. And Cain's killing of Abel essentially is the first sin recorded in the Bible. You can say Genesis 3 created the context, because what is the knowledge of good and evil? Deciding who lives, who dies, who's good, and who's bad. But that's never called sin. Sin is attached. If we have an original sin, it's not eating fruit while naked in a garden. Our original sin as human beings is violence. It's choosing to use violence on other people. And what you see fall out from the Cain story is suddenly you have a buildup of violence so great that in Genesis chapter 6, that threat of human violence is so great, it's threatening to flood all of creation. That's the Noah story. It's essentially human beings engaging in violence and escalatory violence and more violence until the whole thing is in danger. Aren't you glad we don't do that anymore as a species, that we learned from our past and we don't build big nuclear bombs that would blow up the whole planet? We've learned not so much. And so if that's the case, and sin is not mentioned in Genesis 3, then what is up with this whole idea of original sin? Why do we have it? I think partly because people trying to deal with the problem of Genesis 3, which is shame and estrangement. People feel shame. And when we are acting out of shame, we do not make our best decisions, do we? When we're acting out of this sense of shame. And the sad thing is, instead of offering an antidote to shame, which is, hey, actually, you were born originally good and originally blessed. You didn't come into this world broken. You didn't come into this world needing saving. You didn't come into this world a problem for God or anybody else. You came into this world as a beautiful, beloved child of God, and you belong. And because we have not been able to say that, billions of people who have found their way to the Christian faith, and even those who haven't, because we don't just keep our shame inside, do we? As a tradition, we have been willing to share that with everybody. And so we've created this context. And what happened to Adam and Eve in this mythic story, and it's a mythic story, what happens to Adam and Eve in this story doesn't change their connection to God, and it doesn't change ours. Progressive Christianity begins with this idea that we are inherently united with God, that we are connected to the divine, and nothing can change that. It is not a story of sin and separation. It is a story of shame and estrangement. It is a story of shame and this sense of separation. Do you know why you probably thought when you were younger that you were separated from God? Do you know why? Because somebody told you were. You didn't come up with that on your own. I promise you, my littles had no idea what separation from God would be like, because it can't happen. And they've never been told that they are. We are taught that. And I think it's why it's so important for us to unteach it. We are no more separated from God than the younger brother was separated from his father in Jesus' story of the prodigal son. You remember that story? The younger brother goes off, wastes everything, comes back home broke and full of shame. And what does the father do? Father says, you know what, son, we need to have a talk. You've brought so much shame on our family. How dare you? We publicly disowned you. We want nothing. No. This father hitches up his toga, I don't know what you call that, tunic, bears some legs and runs to that boy. Picks up the phone and calls the DJ he keeps on retainer just for situations like this, as everyone ought to. And they throw a party to celebrate because he actually says, this son of mine, always been a son of mine. and he was gone, and now he's back. I thought he was dead, and he's alive. We have to celebrate. We are born united with God, and we're also in process. Those two things are not in tension with each other. How many of you all think differently now, behave differently now, you're more mature now, you've changed your opinion now in ways that you feel like have made you a better human being over time? Yeah. In the religious language, we would say we've repented over time. We've changed our mind about things. I am so grateful that when I started preaching at 15, who let me preach at 15, by the way? You want to talk about people who have some bad judgment? Like, yeah, let's put that kid up there. When I first started preaching in the mid-90s, they recorded everything on cassette tape. Thank God, because hardly anybody has a cassette tape player anymore. And that means that those sermons are exactly where they should be, lost to history, because they're awful. Not only is the delivery bad, but the theology stinks. And I was struggling because even as a younger person, I had senses inside. What I'm saying doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel like good news, but it's true, so I have to say it. And then I learned it's actually not true. There are lots of ways of looking at things, and there are better ways to be Christian. I've changed over time, and I still will. If you listen to my sermons in 10 years, and if I'm still around and preaching, I hope that you're like, that guy changed. He changed. He thinks differently now. He learned something new, and he changed his mind as a result. We're all in process, and that's okay. So a couple thoughts, and then I want to open it up for conversation. One, bad theology always creates bad anthropology. And what I mean by that is when you have toxic opinions and beliefs about God, it transforms into toxic opinions and beliefs about human beings, right? And somebody at the 9 o'clock pointed out that it actually also is true opposite. When you have bad, toxic opinions of humans, you can then cast that out into the universe and call that God. And isn't it interesting that Anne Lamott says that you know you've created God in your own image when God hates all the same people you do? Isn't it interesting that my God always agrees with me and always dislikes all the people that I dislike and always, isn't that really, really interesting? It could be because we made that God up. And now we've created I think maybe some people should have, you know the sign when you walk to somebody's house and it says, beware of dog? I think some people ought to have to put a sign that says, beware of God, because their image of God is so toxic that it then leads them and justifies their abuse and mistreatment of human beings, right? Because if your God is a genocidal maniac, then you can too. If your God is hateful and will roast billions of billions, almost everybody who's ever lived in a literal hell forever, then why can't you do whatever you want to them while they're here? Why can't you shame them, guilt them, harass them, oppress them? Why can't you try to strip their rights away from them? Because, God doesn't care. God's on your side. You're on God's side. And so I think it's important for us to just say, if the beginning of our theology is rooted in something toxic, no matter how we try to clean it up, it is going to be a toxic faith. A God who can't come near God's children because they did something wrong isn't a good God. Isn't a God worth believing in. To quote our friend Derek Webb, some gods deserve atheists. And the God of original sin deserves atheists because it's not a good God. Second, to say original sin isn't a thing is not to say that sin isn't a thing. That's what people always jump to, right? Like, well, there's no original sin. You're saying there's no such thing as sin, and look what all those people are doing. And no, sin exists. Of course sin exists. There are ways that we individually do harm to ourselves and other people. And when we get together in groups, there are ways we create systems that are harmful to ourselves and to other people, right? That's just true. To say that sin doesn't exist, to say there aren't ways, you can use whatever word you want for it, but to say there aren't ways we're doing real damage and harm to the world and ourselves and others, that would just be not paying attention. Of course sin is a thing. What I'm saying is sin does not have the power to separate you from God. Nothing does. In Romans, Paul gets really worked up and he just announces, nothing in all of creation can separate you from the love of God. And that's actual good news. Would you agree? That is actual good news. And then two things. What's at stake? I made a post on social media this week that said, if Christianity wants to be Christ-like, we have to get rid of original sin. There were some people on the internet who did not agree, and they disagreed strongly, and they were very mad at me. Now, why were they mad at me? One thing they said, one thing they didn't say, but it was obvious. The one thing they said is, if you take original sin off the table, then Jesus did not have to die. Yeah, that's right. Jesus didn't have to die. Yeah, God didn't kill Jesus. The sins of human beings kind of killed Jesus because that's what empire does, right? But Jesus did not die to pay God for our sins. This was not some sort of like weird hostage negotiation between God, Jesus, and the devil where they're trying to figure out, what's going to happen. That's not what happened at all. Jesus did not have to die to make you right with God. And we're going to talk about that a little more next week. We're going to talk about what does it mean to be Christian in the progressive Christian lens. But fundamentally, Jesus did not have to die so that God could like you or feel good about you or see you differently. Can you imagine the kind of parent I would be if my kids messed up and I was like, all right, go get the goat. Now we have to kill something to make you okay. No, God doesn't operate that way. That's not how God operates. That's how humans operate sometimes. But I don't think that's how God operates primarily. So one is, what's at stake? Atonement theology. Like explaining the death of Jesus, explaining why it happened, and looking at the actual human causes of it, not the divine causes because there were none. And then second, the thing they didn't say, which was very apparent, is that when you take original sin off the table and you tell people that they're not separated from God, they're born united with God, whether you go to church or don't go to church, whether you believe in this faith or any faith, you are united with God. You're a breathing human being, you're in. You lose control over people, right? You lose control over people. It is, and listen, conservative Christianity does a much better job, terribly, of motivating people because they use shame and guilt like crazy, and they use fear like crazy, right? It's this idea that, for example, if you're trying to get people to do trunk or treat at a fall festival, in the progressive world, you just got to hope they're feeling it. In the conservative world, you can say, yeah, we need you to do trunk or treat, and if you don't, God will send you to hell. And you may be thinking, isn't a trunk or treat already kind of like hell? Maybe. Ours won't be, but some of them can be. And essentially the two motivators that I grew up with, and I bet some of you did too, one was fear, the other was certainty. We have certainty. Why would you doubt your faith? Why would you question your beliefs? We have certainty. We know that we know that we know that we know that we know. All those other people, they think they know. We know, right? Certainty. Fear. One false move and God is going to get you. You ever feel like God was just sitting on a park bench with a newspaper with like 2 eye holes cut out, just like watching you to see if you messed up? Fear and certainty. What I've learned is those two things that were the primary motivations given to me for my faith. Fear, I don't need. Never make your best decisions when you're afraid. All right. Certainty, we can't have because it doesn't exist. And those are the primary two motivators. And when you take those away, you lose control over people. If I can make you believe that you're fundamentally broken and that I have the solution to the problem, I can get you to do whatever I want you to do. I can take all your money, I can use you and abuse you and be toxic towards you, and you'll think you're stuck because I've got the answers. So I think they'd never say that part out loud because they don't believe that's actually going on, but I think it is. Original sin helped us for 2,000 years almost control the masses. And now, one of the things we have to say in the progressive world is like, if people don't think what you're doing matters, and if it doesn't mean something to them, they're not going to engage it. And that's actually okay. It's better than giving people all sorts of phobia and fear and toxicity through which they're now trying to make sense of their life. So we begin here, not with sin and separation, but we begin with you are a beloved child of God, born in the embrace of God, and nothing can ever take that away from you. Are you with me? Yes. All right. So let's do this. We're going to take some questions, comments. If you make rude remarks, remember this is on the internet, so it'll live forever. You can ask questions. You can offer perspective, whatever. These are big topics, and I want to make sure that I'm not a monologue. I want to hear where you're at and what you're thinking. So we're going to start. Adam, do we have anything online yet? Are we good? Does anybody want to go first? We have one, Murph, right over here. Here's why I love doing sermons this way, because on a normal Sunday, if the sermon is bad, it's all my fault. Now, if it's bad, we did it together. And so don't let it be bad.
Okay, I don't know if this, maybe you have something to back up this question, or maybe it's just your opinion. I'm just curious. Why make the tree if, like, I feel like that's just setting, like, humans up for failure. So why make the tree?
Okay, so here's why. Because this is a story. This did not happen in human history. It is a story. And what do stories need? Stories need the option to go one way or the other. Like, for example, I use this a lot. I'll use it till I die because I think it's a good point. The movie National Lampoon's Vacation. Hang with me. If that movie was opening credits, they plan a trip to Wally World, they go to Wally World, everybody has a great time and they drive home, I'm not watching that movie. I need them to meet disaster for it to be an interesting film. I need them to jump the car in the desert. You know what I'm talking about? I need them to do that. I need that to happen because stories need that. Now, I think there's something else going on with this story in particular, that this story is a part of the Torah, which is the first 5 books, which are a collection of writings, strands of which existed and then got brought together during a period of time called the exile. Now, the exile was a time when Judah, Israel had already been defeated. Judah gets defeated by the Babylonians. They're taken to Babylon in exile. And then the longing is to go back home. Most scholars think the Torah got its final form during that period. So it's interesting that they would begin with a story of we were in paradise, everything was right, then we made some choices, which the prophets would say were allowing injustice to go unchecked, not caring for the poor, the widow, the orphan, that sort of thing. And because of that, then we had this sense of estrangement from home, and we're left sitting by the rivers of Babylon weeping and hanging our harps, right? This is not a literal, this story, if you take it literally, has a ton of problems. Let's just begin with the fact that God doesn't seem to know very much. Not what you would expect God to know, right? You would expect God to have more information. This God isn't all-knowing. This God doesn't seem to be all-powerful. This God is not everywhere all at once. This God is hanging out in a garden looking for some naked people. Like, that's what's happening in this story. And so, if we take it literal, like, Adam existed, and because Adam and Eve sinned, all of this gets passed down to us. Well, but what we know from science is that that's not how it worked. The earth is not 6,000 years old. Don't tell Ken Ham. Or maybe do. There wasn't, if you try to trace who was the first human, we don't, like what anthropologists and folks who study that would say is there really probably wasn't a first human. It was, to become who we are today, it was a gradual process of evolution. When you try to explain this to a 7-year-old and they're like, where did humans come from? Well, long time ago, we were primates, and then they run around saying, I'm a monkey. You're like, that, age appropriate. But this idea that we evolved over time to get to where we are. There was no first human who could commit the first sin, right? So I would say, this story is a group of people trying to explain where they were, where they are, and the longing to get back to where they were. But that for them is much more tied to geography in their land. It has less to do with God. So I hope that made some sense. Do we have anything online, Adam? Wow. I'll try not to be hurt by that.
Is it on? Can you hear me? Okay. I just wanted to comment because it was used in one of the churches that I went to, and that is that in this story also, women get bashed terribly. This story is used to bash women and to use it as the very reason why, not what Paul said, but the very reason why women shouldn't be responsible for anything in a church. Yep. And that is that Eve was the first one, and then she polluted by giving Adam she did it. She's the one. Yeah. She's the original sinner.
And you know what's strange about that? There was a day it dawned on me when I was like, wait. All that stuff about this is going to happen and your desire will be for your husband and he will rule over you, all this that they're basing their complementarian garbage theology in. Just let that come right out there, didn't I? It's a curse. They're known as the curses. So we have a religion saying, you know what? Those curses sound great. Let's build a whole religion around the curse. When our faith actually should be trying to counteract the division of that curse. Yeah, that's a great point. Adam, you got one?
Yeah, we've got one.
We shamed them into it, didn't we?
Yeah, we sure did. We have one from Stephen, and he asks, what's a more realistic understanding of sin then? If it exists, is it simply the collective moral consciousness of the current age?
So there's a writer, last name is Plantinga. He had a definition of sin where he said, sin is culpable disturbance of shalom. It's essentially disturbing peace in ways that are culpable, right? So in ways that you have a part in. I would also say, I think, trying to toe the line between individual sin and collective sin, the Bible isn't so concerned as much about individual sin, although it's concerned about it. The Bible really is concerned with collective sin, because collective sin is how you get empire. And collective sin is how you get war. And collective sin is how you get a society that says, you know what, the fact that we spend so much money on bombs, but we have so many unhoused and hungry people, like, we're comfortable with that. That's collective sin, right? That's collective sin. That we have entire legislatures that are trying to outlaw human beings' existence, and we keep voting for these same people, is collective sin. So I think both exist. I mean, there are ways I could harm you, right? There are ways we harm each other. But they also sort of get on a head of steam, and we create entire societies built around harm. And so I think that, for me, that idea of I'm disturbing the flourishing and peace of someone else or myself or the planet or whoever. I think the idea of sin, and maybe we should just do a whole week at some point on sin, and we'll call it Sin Week. It'd be great. But yeah, I think the world needs we need to be able to speak about the problems and harm of the world in ways that still have resonance. And if we were to say, well, I don't like the word sin, it just sounds a little too negative, I'm going to get rid of it. Well, then, but I think we need that negative word to explain and to push back on the injustice of the world, if that makes sense. Who we got?
Hi. Greetings, any fellow introverts. Is there anything more fun than holding a mic in a room full of people? No. Okay. So you might have to help me connect this specifically to your sermon. I've been dealing with, as my beliefs growing up in a conservative church, a little town in Tennessee that was home to Church of God and Church of God of Prophecy. It was kind of like a buckle of the Bible Belt, some say.
Yeah.
So, fear and shame, it's a part of my childhood. It's great. And the unraveling, the deconstruction as that happens, it's kind of like the fact that is happening. It's like, well, then how do I stop believing in the whole enchilada when there was so much trauma? And are you kidding me? When you think back, and like when you see on Facebook what your friends have been talking about the last 12 years, and the things everybody says in the same words that mean nothing, in the same trite phrases, and the rhymey phrases that nobody thinks about. What does it really mean? To go, I can't believe that. I can't go with that anymore. So then the whole thing starts, I feel like, well, then what is true? What if it's nothing is true? And growing up in it, that's absolutely terrifying.
Sure.
You know what I mean? And I don't want to. I want to feel like, oh, it's all wrapped up in a bow, safe in the arms of Jesus. Everything's good. Everybody's going to heaven. I mean, I'm not going to hell, but everyone else is. But I mean, I'm not,
Yeah.
So how do you get your head around not just having to trash everything because it's so absurd the way you grew up?
So a couple things. Some people need to trash everything because it's been such a harmful, abusive, toxic experience that for them to be okay, they need to just say, I'm done. And that's a valid option. What I hear you saying is, I don't want that. I don't want to be done. I want to hang on. I would say this is a long journey. This is a marathon, not a sprint. And so Like let's imagine somebody's 80 years old and they say, for 77 years of my life, I was a fundamentalist Christian. And now that no longer works for me, but I'm still struggling in the last 3 years of my deconstruction journey. I'm still struggling to make sense of it all. What I often say to people is like, well, so you were in this one way of thinking for this long, and now you've been in this new way of thinking for this long. It's going to take a minute. You didn't get to where you were quick. And so in some ways, it is a process. And so there's no easy fix for that. There's no easy answer for that. What I will say is what I've discovered is that so much of what I thought I was going to have to let go of and reject, I've been able to come back to differently. And so I think it's okay for some of this to be a la carte. Do you know what I mean? It's okay to say, look, I love Christianity. I love Jesus. I don't think original sin does God any favors or us. I think we should get rid of it. And I think it's okay to get rid of it because I don't think it's grounded in reality. So I think it's figuring out what works for you and being patient with yourself and realizing that you don't have to figure it all out, that you are, in fact, safe in the arms of Jesus, even if you don't know what you believe about him. Because the thing I've found is that wanting to be safe in the arms of Jesus means you are. So I would say try to be patient with yourself, be patient with the journey. This always happens to me when I'm around heights. I'll look over and just get all like, oh, it's okay. That's normal. If you aren't feeling a little panicky about deconstructing everything you've believed for a while, then you're probably not paying attention, and it sounds like you're paying attention. And so the last thing I would say is trust yourself and trust that the reality, God, Spirit, whatever, that brought you onto this journey is going to stay with you through the journey. And I believe that's true. So what I would say is you're safe. You're safe. Adam?
Yeah, we have one from Penny online, and they ask, why the emphasis on the Old Testament, since they are often horrible stories? Like, why is it important to incorporate that?
I would say just we have to be careful with that because that teeters over into accidental anti-Semitism. Because the idea that the New Testament is free of stories that are horrible, it ain't true. Ask Ananias and Sapphira when God killed them for not giving enough to the church offering. So there are lots of complicated stories. The reason the stories are complicated and complex and make us feel weird is because they're ancient, and we've learned things that they didn't know. Part of the reason for the emphasis on the Old Testament Hebrew Bible is because if you don't understand the Hebrew Scriptures, you don't understand Jesus. And the way you end up with a Jesus who looks more like a Roman emperor and less like an itinerant Jewish prophet is that you ignore the Hebrew Scriptures and you craft a Jesus out of Platonic philosophy who ends up not looking anything like the Jesus of history. So I say, there are some pastors who say we need to unhitch from the Old Testament. Well, good luck, you lost Jesus because Jesus is back there with it. When the first followers of Jesus tried to explain him, they went back to their scriptures and reinterpreted them. So I think the Hebrew Bible is just as important as the New Testament for Christians to have a lens for who Jesus was and what he was up to.
So you basically have explained something about Genesis that I've never noticed, and that there isn't actually sin in that first part, right? So my thing is this, is that often the argument against the progressive view is simply that, well, their sin was that they disobeyed God, right? But the thing is like, what does that even mean? Like, and this is where it's becoming difficult for me as I'm deconstructing, is because it's like, I want to do what God's down for, if that makes sense. And maybe that's just me growing up feeling like I have to, but I guess I grew up Southern Baptist, and the way you connect with God is by, obeying his commands or whatever. But also it just seems like when I talk to people in that world, their whole concept of obeying God is just like, I don't know, doing a bunch of rote stuff, like listening to worship music or reading the Bible or whatever. None of it makes sense. So I guess my point is does God want me to obey him or what? What am I supposed to do with all that? Because it's heavy,
Yeah. I mean, obey God according to whose opinion of what God wants you to do, right? That's the rub. I love Micah 6:8, do justice, walk humbly. I think to obey God in my mind is to do what creates human flourishing. And sometimes that'll put you on the opposite end of what religion tells you should be doing, because religion often has a vested interest on keeping humans away from flourishing. Because what if they don't need us anymore? I think we always need community, right? So, yeah.
Okay. So sort of following up on a couple of things that people have said, can you just talk briefly about sort of that finding the truth in these ancient stories that are not historical, and also letting go of sort of what must be true about God if we read these stories as historical and inerrant and all of those sorts of things?
I mean, well, I keep saying it, and then, and real quick, we'll do one more online, and then Ricky asked a question earlier that I want to get to before, and then we'll have to wrap. But if you have more questions, email them to me, write them down, give them to me. I'm happy to respond to them more. God is a character in the Bible. God's a character in the Bible. We're not hearing from God in the Bible. We're hearing from people about their understanding of God in the Bible. That's different, right? These stories they still have meaning. They still have, if they're interpreted well, they still, I think, speak like, you can say, gosh, the whole story of Noah and the flood, but if you put it in context that human violence is running rampant and threatening everything, sounds a little relevant. And so I think it all has to do with, us having a modern sort of arrogance that says, look, back then they were just so not smart as us and kind of barbaric, and they just didn't know things. They didn't know a lot of things. They thought if you sneezed funny, you were possessed with a demon. I get it. There are certain things we want to let go of, but when they're talking about meaning, often the meaning is still profound. I mean, read the book of Jonah. If we don't learn how to live with our enemies and care for them, then we're all in big trouble. That dog will still hunt. So I think it's about letting the stories be what they are, which is ancient stories, and then entering into it and asking, is there meaning for us here? And sometimes there may not be, and it's okay to say, you know what, that story's not for me. That's okay. I think that's okay to a la carte stories too. One more online, and then Ricky.
Okay, I do have one. I think I have to flesh it out a little bit here, but Anne is saying, I would like to know Josh's thoughts on my daughter's idea that vengeful sin doctrines are a test of our hearts. And to go back and reference what she had said earlier, she said, my kid recently told me she thinks that the negative doctrines and apparently evil or vengeful bits in the Bible are a test of our own hearts and minds. I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, that there are some ancient church fathers who said something similar to that. I would say that if the idea is that God put the Bible together, that God was responsible for putting the Bible together this way, then I think that's not very nice of God. If humans are, then I think we need to do a better job at reading and interpreting their stories through the lens of their context, through the lens of their experience. I think what gets us in trouble is not that there are these stories that are bad stories. It's that we come into these stories with a bad idea about God, and so then we read them and then allow them to give us bad ideas about people too. And so I think it's really important, whyever the things are in there the way they are, it's really important for us to approach them with clarity, with context, and with an understanding that we are engaging ancient stories, and so that some of the things they think of doing, we wouldn't think of doing because they're illegal. And that's okay, we've advanced. That doesn't mean they don't have something to offer us. So they definitely can test our hearts, and lots of times we sadly fail that test, I think. Ricky.
So the online people can hear. I grew up in a denomination where a lot of language around the age of accountability. I don't know if anybody has heard that before, but thinking about original sin. And so when, thinking about you holding the baby, we were taught that there was a space of time until you've reached this unknown age. For me, it was, I think, around 8. I think you said it was 13.
It's 13, I think, for me.
That you weren't accountable to sin or anything, but you eventually would sin because of sinful nature and whatever. So I just was curious where that came from, or if it's grounded in biblical teaching.
Yeah, it's in 1 Hezekiah 13, which is not a real book of the Bible, because it's something we made up. This age, it was 13 for us, and it was this idea that, like, there's a moment, like yesterday, when you were 12 and 364 days, if you had died, you had been fine. But you made it one more day, you rascal. And now you're 13, and you're fully responsible, and if you die, you're going to go straight to hell. what? I mean, the logic of it is not there. And what I mean by the logic of it is not there is like, it just raises so many questions. Like, why shouldn't why would we let anybody get to the age of accountability? Like, why would we not just guarantee that we're all going to heaven? I mean, and I think where it comes from is it comes from painting yourself into a corner. And the corner is, we've all originally sinned, and we come into this world tainted, and if we die without being forgiven, we're going to hell. And then suddenly you have to deal with, well, what happens when something awful happens to children? Would God actually send children, just innocent little children, would God send them to hell? And so you've painted yourself into a corner that all humans are awful and rotten and sinful, and then you're like, oh, but babies are cute. So we're going to say this. There's an age of accountability, and it may be different for different people, but you'll know when it hits you because you're going to feel awful about yourself. And when you hit that age of accountability, it's your job to repent. I think it is an attempt to save ourselves from the monster God we created. Because we created a God that when we pulled back the curtain on it, we realized, wow, when you actually listen to what we say about God, it's pretty terrible. We need to put a couple mechanisms in there to save us from the God who's trying to save us, because this is bad. And so I think when you take original sin off the table, you take that off the table too. But I think it's ultimately an attempt to say, gosh, we've created some terrible toxic theology around God, and we need to be saved from our theology about God. And so we end up creating a narrative that sort of grandfathers in up into a certain point. Did anybody else hear that growing up, the age of accountability business? Anybody else wonder if you'd hit it? If you wonder, you did. And the other thing is, like, it would be great if it was like the age of accountability is 90. Otherwise, you're fine. So yeah, and I mean, just this whole business of a God that we need to be saved from should have all the little lights on our dashboard blinking and going, this isn't very good. And by jettisoning the doctrine of original sin, not because it's true and we don't like it, but because it's not very original and it doesn't reflect God's character and it doesn't reflect what it means to be human, and it's caused a lot of damage in the world. So we need to let it go and embrace this wonderful idea that you are made in the image of God, you are born in the embrace of God, and every breath you will ever take has been taken inside that embrace. And I almost said can't nobody. I was just, can't nobody take that away from you. Are you with me? Yeah, good. Let's pray. By the way, Joel, do you all like this? Yeah. Okay, good. All right, let's pray. God, for every person in this room, for every person watching online, for somebody who stumbles upon over this in 10 years, and they have been taught that there's something about them that is fundamentally bad and broken. They were taught that they entered this world a problem that you needed to solve. God, may we hear the opposite today. That we are loved and beloved. That we come into this world connected, united, embraced by you. And every breath we take, every single moment of our lives happens within that embrace. May we hear the news, the good news, that we are not separated because of sin, but that we are fully, wonderfully loved and embraced. We offer this in gratitude. Everybody said, amen.
Feeling nervous, aren't you, boy? With your quiet voice and impeccable style. Don't ever let them steal your joy or your gentle ways to keep them from running wild. They can kick dirt in your face, press you down and tell you that your place is in the middle. They hate the way you shine. I see you tugging on your shirt, trying to hide inside of it and hide how much it hurts. Well, let them laugh while they can. Let them spin, let them scatter in the wind. I have been to the movies, I've seen how it ends, and the joke's on You get discouraged, don't you, girl? It's your brother's world for a while longer. You gotta dance with the devil on a river to beat the stream. Call it living the dream, call it kicking the ladder. They come to kick dirt in your face, call you weak and then displace you after carrying your baby on your back across the desert. I saw your eyes behind your hair, and you're looking tired, but you don't look scared. So let them laugh while they can. Let them spin, let them scatter in the wind. I've been to the movies, I've seen how it ends. The joke's on So let them laugh while they can. Let them spin, just let them scatter in the wind. I've been to the movies, I've seen how it ends. It's the jokes Thank y'all so much. Grace Point, thanks for being with us today. We love you. It was a great service, and we're proud of you. Have a good week. We'll see you back next time.